testify?
I do.
Thank you, ma'am.
Terry, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
If you could please tell the jury your name and spell your last name for the court reporter.
My name is Melissa Lavigne, and my last name is Lavigne.
All right, and Ms. Line, where are you currently employed?
I am in the biology section of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in the Tampa Bay region
How long have you been working there?
since 2007.
What do you do there?
Currently, I'm a forensic technologist, but I also was a senior crime laboratory analyst, which was my position when I issued the reports. I examined items of evidence and tried to develop DNA profiles from those items.
All right. What is forensic serology and DNA analysis?
So forensic serology is when I examine items of evidence for possible body fluids such as semen, saliva, and blood. And forensic DNA analysis is when I examine those items of evidence to try to develop DNA profiles.
Now, at the time, you just kind of quickly went over, at the time you submitted these reports, what was your title at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
I was a senior crime laboratory analyst.
All right, you're not in that position anymore?
Correct.
And that was was that for personal reasons, or?
Yes, for family obligations, I needed a little bit more freedom, so I requested to step down to a less demanding position.
Okay, but it had nothing to do with performance or anything like that,
Correct. It was by my request.
All right. What sort of training and education and background do you have?
So I have my bachelor's in biology, or bachelor's of science in biology from Florida State University. And some courses relevant to a crime laboratory analyst is biochemistry, genetics, statistics, and molecular biology. Did you also ask me my training, or no?
No, I was just sort of talking, but you know what I did? What
Okay.
sort of training did you have, too?
I also completed the training program at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. It's a two-part process. The first part is when I do practice samples, which is a test on non-evidence samples. I read published literature. The second part is supervised casework, where I do examine items of evidence with a qualified analyst, and during both phases, I have to pass written and oral assessments.
All right, and have you passed all those assessments?
Yes, I did.
Do you belong to any professional organizations?
I do not.
Okay. What sort of duties does a DNA analyst have?
So a DNA analyst will examine items of evidence. The analyst will write written reports and publish or testify when needed.
All right. Is the lab you work at, is that accredited?
It is.
And approximately how many DNA analysis have you done, you think, in your career?
Oh, I have processed over 1,000 samples.
And as part of your work at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, correct?
That is correct.
And do you have a continuing training or continuing educational training as part of that?
Yes, for a crime laboratory analyst, I did.
Okay. And you don't have that as much anymore?
No, it's not part of my current position.
All right. And back when you were in that position, you had mentioned earlier you take proficiency tests. Did you continue to have to take those every year while you were working there?
Yes, as a crime laboratory analyst, I had to take 2 proficiency tests a year.
And have you passed every proficiency test you've been given?
I have.
Have you ever testified in court as an expert on DNA analysis?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times would you say you've done that?
Over 80 times.
All right. And is that some of that here in Hillsborough County and other counties as well?
Yes.
All right. Judge, at this time, I'd turn to the witness if they have any questions.
I have no voir dire on this matter.
Thank you. So, Ms. Line, if you can, please explain to the jury in the most simplest terms possible, what is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's the code found in all of our cells except for red blood cells, and it makes us who we are. It's inherited. You get half from your mother and half from your father, and only identical twins will have the same DNA.
Okay. And where is DNA found? You said in every cell other than red blood cells?
Yes, all of our cells except for red blood cells, but within blood are white blood cells which do contain DNA.
Okay. What is the method of DNA testing that you used?
The type of testing I did was called STR testing.
And what is STR testing?
STR testing stands for short tandem repeat. I test specific areas of the DNA that are repeated over and over again.
All right. How long has STR testing been used?
Since the early 1990s.
And is it generally accepted in the forensic science community?
Yes, it is the most widely used.
Now, when did you first become involved in the Ronny Walker case?
May I review my notes, please? The first items were submitted to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement on May 25th of 2022.
And what items were you given to analyze initially?
I received fingernail clippings from the left hand and right hand, swabs from a tropical fantasy bottle mouth area, or mouthpiece, excuse me, swab of left hand, swab of right hand, swabs of red substance from evidence marker 1, swabs from suspected blood from marker E, a black jacket with a hanger, swabs from interior DSR door, buccal swabs from Ronny Walker, and a stain card from Nilexia Alexander.
And what does a stain card mean, just so the jury understands?
A stain card is what I use as a known standard. So it is liquid blood taken directly from an individual and dried down onto a card. I use that for comparison purposes, so the DNA profile I get from that item is that individual's DNA profile.
All right, and the same with the buccal swab, what is that?
Buccal swab is also a known standard. It's taken from the inside of someone's mouth, so the DNA profile that I get from a buccal swab will be that person's profile.
And how are these items received by your office?
They are submitted by a contributing agency, and they are sealed and routed to me.
All right, and is it kept secure at your facility?
Yes, once the items of evidence are received, they are stored in the evidence vault. When I am assigned the case, I will check out the evidence from the vault and take it into my custody. When I'm not actively working the items, I store them in a secure locker.
Are all these items packaged individually?
The ones that I listed, yes.
Judge, may we approach real quick, Ms. Dunker and I?
Yes.
Sorry about that. So when did you receive these items at your office when?
May 25th, 2022.
All right. And when did you start working on them?
June 15th, 2022.
Okay. What type of instrument do you use at Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
I'm sorry. I processed some evidence on June 15th, 2022, but I also processed some on June 8th, 2022.
Okay. All right. So again, what type of instrument do you all use there?
So I do use various types of instruments. One of the instruments that I use is called a genetic analyzer. That's what I run my DNA sample through to develop my DNA profile.
All right. And are these instruments inspected and certified on a regular basis?
Yes, they are.
All right. Now, of the known samples that you received, the buccal swab from Ronny Alexander and the stain card from Nilexia Alexander, I'm sorry, Ronny Walker and the stain card from Nilexia Alexander, were you able to develop a known profile from these individuals?
Yes, I got complete DNA profiles from both standards.
All right. Now, let's go through these items that you received, and we'll kind of go through them individually to get your results. So let's start with, you mentioned you received fingernail clippings, correct?
I did.
All right, so we'll start with the fingernail clippings you received. Were you able to develop a DNA profile from any of those fingernail clippings?
I did. I got a complete DNA profile consistent with a female individual.
Okay. And were you able to make a comparison with that female individual?
Yes, I compared it to Nilexia Alexander, and it was a match. So she is expected to be a donor to this DNA profile because it came from her, and there was no foreign results.
Okay. And that's what I was going to ask you. So there was no foreign DNA in those fingernails?
Correct. So all the information I received from those items matched the DNA profile from Nilexia Alexander.
I'm going to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit number 21 and ask if you can take a look inside there. First of all, do you recognize any markings on that envelope?
I do. It has the unique FDLE case number as well as my initials and date.
All right, and what are the items in that?
So they are FDL items number 2 and the samples collected from item 2, which were the fingernail clippings and clipper.
Okay. And are those in fact the items that you analyzed?
Yes, they are.
Judge, at this time I move to have State's Exhibit number 21 admitted into evidence.
No
Any
objections.
objections?
New York.
Will be admitted to State 21.
Now, you said she was an expected donor. What does that mean?
So when an item is taken directly from an individual, I would expect that person to be there. So for example, if someone collected a sample from my hand and I ran that for DNA, I would expect my profile to be there. So when I compare my DNA profile to the sample from my hand and it's a match, that means there's nothing foreign. If I happen to run the sample and there was DNA types in addition to me, that would be called foreign because those DNA types did not belong to me, so they were foreign to me.
And do you still verify that the DNA is consistent with the expected donor whenever you do these verifications?
Yes, I always compare the person who is expected to be there before I compare to another individual.
All right. Let's go to the next item that you analyzed, the swab of tropical fantasy bottle mouthpiece. Is that correct?
Yes,
So you weren't given the bottle itself, you were given a swab?
that is correct.
Describe for the jury what these swabs look like or what they're like.
So swabs are very similar to a cotton tip swab that you can get at the grocery store. Most of the time they have a longer stick and just a swab on one side. However, we do get swabs with cotton on both ends. You can sometimes see these types of swabs in doctors' offices, but they're just cotton swabs that are used to collect sample.
All right. And are they kept securely encased?
Yes, once I receive the item, it is secured.
Okay. So this swab of the tropical fantasy bottle mouthpiece, were you able to develop a DNA profile from the swab of that bottle?
Yes, I had a complete DNA profile that was consistent with a female individual.
And were you able to make a comparison with Nilexia Alexander in this case?
Yes, I compared the DNA profile from the mouthpiece of the bottle to Nilexia Alexander, and it was a match.
All right. Was there any foreign DNA on that bottle, on that swab?
It was only a single source profile, so all the DNA types that were on the bottle are consistent with Nilexia Alexander.
And do you calculate a statistical probability of a match when you make these findings?
The statistic I do is called a likelihood ratio. All that is it compares two different scenarios given the DNA evidence and expresses which is more likely.
And what did you determine on that particular swab the statistical probability was?
The observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Nilexia Alexander than from an unrelated individual. I know that's a mouthful, so I can break it down for you. So the two scenarios I'm comparing is if the DNA originated from Nilexia Alexander, and the other scenario I'm comparing is if the DNA originated from an unknown, unrelated individual. So again, the statistic is the observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Nilexia Alexander than from an unrelated individual.
Okay. And you said greater than 700 billion. Is 700 billion basically where you all do the cutoff at that point?
Yes, it's our standard operating procedure. If the number is greater than 700 billion, it's capped there, and we just report out greater than 700 billion.
All right, thank you. The next item it looks like you analyzed was the item 6, which appears to be the swab of the left hand. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, what did you find with regards to this swab?
So I did a test for the chemical indications of blood, and then I did receive chemical indications of blood, and then I did DNA analysis on that item.
All right, and what did you find with regards to the swab?
So the DNA results from that item demonstrated the presence of a mixture. And again, I expected Nilexia Alexander to be present because it came from her hand. So I compared her to the mixture, and she is present in the mixture. There were foreign DNA results to her, which just means there was other DNA types that did not match her.
Okay. Did you make any comparison with that foreign DNA?
No, I did not. They were very low level, so due to the limited nature of these results, this data is not interpretable.
So data non-interpretable means you just couldn't make a comparison one way or the other, excluding or including any individual.
Correct.
So it's that small amount of a foreign DNA.
Correct. So there was just too little information for me to be able to use it for comparison purposes.
Now you had mentioned about a chemical indication of blood. Do you routinely check every sample to determine if the DNA is from blood or another source?
Not always, but if there is staining on the swab, I can test it to see if it's possible blood. Or if I have an article of clothing and there's some staining, I do have the ability to test to see if there's possible blood.
Right. And why did you test this particular sample for blood?
There should be staining, but let me verify my notes. Yes, I did see some red-brown staining, so I did test for blood.
Okay. Going to the next item, item 7. This was a swab of the right hand, is that correct?
That is correct.
And what were your findings for that particular item?
This item also gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. And then I did DNA analysis on this item as well.
All right, what was the DNA results?
The DNA results obtained from this item was a mixture. Again, I expected Nilexia Alexander to be a contributor to the mixture, and she is observed in the mixture. I did receive foreign DNA results to Nilexia Alexander.
Were those interpretable?
No, those foreign results were also limited and not suitable for, and the data was not interpretable.
All right. Now, item 8 is described as swabs of red substance from evidence marker number 1, correct?
Yes,
Did you test this item?
I did.
Now, do you provide the description of the items, or is that how they come to you?
It is how they come to me.
Okay, so when you receive the item and you pull it out of evidence, it will give just a general description of it normally?
Yes.
Okay. What were your findings to item 8, red substance from evidence marker 1?
I received a complete DNA profile consistent with a female individual.
All right. Did you compare that profile with any one of the known samples?
Yes, I compared it to Nilexia Alexander, and it was a match.
And did you determine a statistical ratio with this particular item?
I did.
And what was that?
The observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Nilexia Alexander than from an unrelated individual.
Now, item 9, what was item 9?
Swabs of suspected blood marked E.
All right, and what did you do with that particular item?
I also tested that for the chemical indications of blood, and it was positive for the chemical indications of blood. I then tested for DNA analysis.
And what did you find?
A complete DNA profile consistent with a female individual.
And did you compare that with the known standard of Nilexia Alexander?
I did. The DNA profile matches the DNA profile from Nilexia Alexander.
All right. Now, item 10 is a little bit different. It's not a swab. What was item 10?
It was a black jacket with a hanger.
All right. And did you, what did you do with that? Since it doesn't come to you as a swab, you're just basically given a black jacket. What are you doing with that?
So I first look at the item of evidence and see if there's any staining I can possibly test for a body fluid such as blood. I did test for the chemical indications of blood, but it failed to give me chemical indications of blood.
Okay. So what else, did you do anything else with the jacket?
I did. I then collected sample to possibly see who may have worn the item. So those are known as wearer swabs.
And how is that done?
So I just take a cotton swab and I moisten it with sterile DI water and I rub it against the item in areas that might come next to someone's skin. So in this instance, I swabbed the jacket collar and wrist cuffs because anyone who's wearing that may rub some skin cells onto those areas of the jacket. So I take my swab and I rub it on those items to try to transfer any DNA from the area onto my swab to use for DNA testing.
And were you able to obtain any DNA from those swabs?
Yes, I obtained a mixture consistent with 3 individuals, including at least 1 male contributor.
All right. Did you compare that results with any of the known profiles you had?
I did.
And what did you find?
So I compared the DNA profile of Ronny Walker to the mixture, and he is included as a possible contributor.
Was he a major donor or major contributor?
I have to verify that. So in my mixture interpretation, there is a step where the amount each contributor is contributing to the mixture is estimated. So for example, if I have a mixture, one person can contribute 75%, one person can contribute 24%, and one person can contribute 1%. So within this mixture, Ronny Walker is consistent with contributing, I think it was 58%. Approximately 59%, which is the individual who contributed the most to the mixture.
All right. And what did you determine the statistical probability of that mixture being Ronny Walker?
So the observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Ronny Walker and 2 unrelated individuals than from 3 unrelated individuals. And I'll break this down again because it's a little different from what we heard before. So again, it's a mixture consistent with 3 individuals. So the first scenario I'm comparing is if Ronny Walker and 2 unrelated individuals may have left the DNA because that makes up the 3. And the other scenario I'm comparing is just 3 unrelated individuals.
Okay. So, would you consider that a match for the Ronny Walker to the DNA found on the jacket?
So for mixtures, we use the word included, and Ronny Walker is included as a possible contributor to the jacket.
All right, there's, in this first submission, there was one other item that was submitted. It says swab of interior DSR door, correct?
Yes.
And that was item 11. What did you do with that particular item?
I also tested this item for the chemical indications of blood, and I did receive chemical indications for blood, and then I did DNA analysis.
All right, so it was positive for blood?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And what did you find in the DNA analysis of item 11?
For this item, I obtained a mixture consistent with 3 individuals, including at least 1 male contributor.
All right. And did you make a comparison with that item with the known samples that you had of Nilexia Alexander and Ronny Walker?
Yes, I first compared the standard of Ronny Walker to this mixture. It was represented as being from his vehicle. So since it's from his vehicle, I'm expecting him to be there, so I used him as his standard as an expected donor. I compared his profile to the mixture, and his profile is observed in the mixture. I then compared it to Nilexia Alexander.
And what did you find with Nilexia Alexander?
Nilexia Alexander is included as a possible contributor to this mixture.
And what was the statistical probability of it being Nilexia Alexander's DNA?
The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Ronny Walker, Nilexia Alexander, and an unrelated individual than from Ronny Walker and 2 unrelated individuals. And again, I'll step back and break the 2 different scenarios down. So the first scenario is Ronny Walker, because he's an expected donor, Nilexia Alexander, and an unknown individual to make up the 3. The second scenario is Ronny Walker, who's, again, he was an expected donor, and 2 unrelated individuals.
Notice the line, that was the sum total of the submission from submission 1, correct?
For this report, yes.
Yes. Now, you're also, are you routinely sometimes given, especially if it's a female victim, a sex kit, the swabbing of intimate areas?
Yes.
All right. Did you find any DNA related to Ronny Walker on that swab?
No, I did not.
All right. Thank you. Did you receive a third submission in this case?
I did.
All right, and what was submitted to you in the third submission?
So I received swabs from INT, driver's side, front window, switches button, swabs from front passenger door, and buccal swabs represented as being from Robert Creed.
All right. And what did you do with this submission?
So I examined these items for DNA analysis, and some of the items I also tested for the chemical indications of blood.
Now, the buccal swab represented as being from Robert Creed, were you able to develop a DNA profile of Robert Creed?
Yes, I got a complete DNA profile.
All right. Now, let's start with the swab from the INT driver side front window switches buttons. What did you do with that item?
I first tested for the chemical indications of blood, and it failed to give the chemical indications of blood.
Okay. What did you do next?
I then did DNA analysis on this item.
And what did you find in that DNA analysis?
So the DNA results from this item demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 3 individuals, including at least 1 male contributor.
All right. And did you compare that result with the known DNA profiles of both Ronny Walker, Nilexia Alexander, and Robert Creed?
I did.
And what did you find?
So again, this was represented as being from Ronny Walker's vehicle. So I used him as his standard as an expected donor. So I compared his profile to the mixture, and his profile is observed in the mixture. I then compared the DNA profiles of Nilexia Alexander and Robert Creed, and they were both excluded as possible contributors to the mixed DNA profile.
And you said excluded, meaning Nilexia Alexander and Robert Creed, that was not their DNA on there.
Correct. So their DNA types were not present in the mixture, so they could not have left the DNA on that item.
All right. All right, and that was the driver's side front window switches buttons. You also did a swab from the next item was a swab from the front passenger door.
Correct.
What did you do with that one?
That one I also tested for the chemical indications of blood, and it failed to give chemical indications of blood. I then did DNA analysis on that item.
All right. And were you able to obtain a DNA profile from there?
So due to the limited nature of the DNA results, this data is not interpretable. So all that means it was very low-level data. It was not enough information to use for comparison purposes.
All right, but to be clear, both item number 15, which is the swab from the interior driver's side front window switches buttons, and the swab from the front passenger door, neither one of them gave any chemical indication of blood.
Correct. They both failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood.
All right. Did you compare the now known sample of Robert Creed with some previous samples that you had?
I did.
And what did you find?
So I compared the DNA profile of Robert Creed to the mixture I obtained from the jacket, and he is excluded as a possible contributor to the mixed DNA profile. I also compared Robert Creed's DNA profile to the mixture obtained from the swab of INT DSR door, and it failed to demonstrate sufficient statistical support for inclusion or exclusion. Therefore, no determination can be made regarding the contribution of Robert Creed to this item. It's a mouthful. Basically, I can't say if he's a possible contributor or not. I don't know.
Okay. And when it comes to Robert Creed, we had talked earlier about Ronny Walker's DNA not being on the intimate swabs from Nilexia Alexander. Was Robert Creed excluded as well as being from that swabs?
Yes, he was excluded.
Did you receive any further submissions in this case?
I did not.
Judge Vaughn, may I have a moment?
Yes.
All right, Ms. Lavigne, thank you very much. I'll pass witness, Your Honor.
Thank you. Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Okay, how about a
start by asking you just some kind of general questions about DNA. So
Sure.
when we talk about leaving DNA behind, what exactly are we leaving behind, or what can we be leaving behind?
So, for example, if I handle an item of, if I handle something, I may be leaving some skin cells from my hand onto that item. If I swab the surface of something, it's possible that if someone spoke over it, sneezed over it, they may leave saliva, which can contain or contains DNA. If there is a red-brown stain, that could be possibly from blood, and that would also contain DNA.
Okay. Is someone always going to leave DNA behind?
Not always. Some people leave more DNA behind than others. It can also depend on the item itself. So, for example, if it's a rough item, more skin cells may come off on a rough item compared to a smooth item. If someone just recently washed their hands, they may not leave as much DNA behind when they handle something.
You spoke a little bit about mixtures. When we talk about a mixture, does that mean that two people left behind DNA at the same time?
No, it does not. All that a mixture means is that in my sample, there is DNA from more than one person.
So in a scenario with a mixture, could it be that two individuals left their DNA behind at two completely separate times?
Yes, that is correct.
Can you give a timestamp on DNA?
I cannot. I can't say when DNA is deposited on an item.
Can you tell how DNA was left behind?
I cannot.
All you can really do is look at the data and determine if a person's DNA profile is present in that profile.
Yes, that's all I can do.
Okay. You also mentioned the term a couple of times, complete profile. What does that mean? What is a complete profile?
So when I talk about a complete profile, that just means I received information at all areas I tested. Another option would be a partial profile, and that just means I received some information at some of the areas I tested, but not information at every single area.
Okay. And how many total areas were you testing for at the time that you tested DNA in this case?
STR areas.
When you say STR, that's short tandem repeat.
Correct.
And so what you're looking, basically the steps that you're going through is when you get a swab or an item, you're making, is it millions of copies? Or
Many copies. Yes, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but yes, the sample is multiplied thousands of times in order to run it through the instrument to kind of intensify the sample in order to pick up the results.
And when we talk about short tandem repeat, what you're looking at after you run those thousands of copies or so is you're looking to see how many times a particular gene type repeats itself. Is that correct?
Yeah, so when I run a DNA profile and I look at an area, it's represented by numbers. And those numbers are the number of times the short tandem repeat is repeated, So for example, at an area, someone can be a 13-14. All that means is that they got 13 repeat units from one of their parents and 14 repeat units from their other parent. If they're a 13-13, that just means that individual received 13 repeat units from both of their parents.
And when you talk about seeing more than one person at a particular area, does that become apparent to you if you are looking at a particular area or location on the DNA and there is more than two of those alleles?
Yes, a mixture is indicated when an area has more than two peaks at an area, because I'm expecting one peak from one parent and one peak from another parent. So if areas have more than two peaks, it indicates that there's more than one person present.
So the first step in your process, or maybe not the first step, but one of the first steps is to make these copies of the DNA, correct?
Yes,
And then you look at the overall results.
I do.
And those appear to you in numbers like on a graph.
Yes, the graph is referred to as an electropharogram.
And the first thing that you try and determine by looking at that electropharogram is whether or not this is a single source profile or if there are multiple individuals appearing.
Yes, I try to determine the number of contributors to the profile.
After you determine the number of contributors, then you move on to the comparison to the known DNA profiles that you have.
I do.
Okay. And you have a program or software that assists you in doing some of these things.
Yes, I do have a software that helps do the calculations for the statistics I perform.
But before those statistics are performed, you have to put in your own, basically your own assumptions that you're making as the analyst.
Yes, so I tell the computer program, I upload the mixture into the program. I tell it how many individuals I believe are present in the mixture, and I also tell it if I believe someone is an expected donor or not. And I also tell it what standards to compare for statistical purposes.
I want to draw your attention now to a couple of the specific items that you tested in this case. The first being FDLE item number 11, that swab of interior driver's side door. Now, the first thing I want to ask you about is you mentioned in relation to this swab as well as others that you tested for the possible presence of blood.
I did.
Is there a name for that test that you do?
Castlemeyer?
Is that the same thing or is it different than what is also known as a phenolphthalein test?
Yes, I tend to say Castlemeyer because I can't spell phenolphthalein.
Sorry about that. But those names are used synonymously.
Yes, so the test is phenolphthalein, but Castlemeyer is the person who developed the test.
And that is what we call a presumptive test, correct?
Yes.
And so it's basically looking to determine if there's a specific element or a protein in the item that you're swabbing.
So it's testing for a component of blood. So that's why it's chemical indications of blood, because I'm testing for a component present in blood.
Are there things other than blood that can give you a positive result in this presumptive test?
Yes, those are known as false positives.
Okay. Is there, maybe not used at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, but is there in your field a confirmatory blood test?
Yes, there is a confirmatory test for human blood.
And is that test utilized at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Rarely.
Okay. Was it used in this case?
I did not use it.
Okay. Going on then to your results as to this item, the swab of the driver's side door. You initially look at the results in your electropharogram and you made the call that there were 2 contributors upon first looking at it. Is that correct?
When I did do the interpretation, yes. So during my interpretation process, I looked to see there was no area with more than 5 peaks. So if you remember how I said, each area will have, if there's one person, no more than 2 peaks. So if there's 2 people, I would expect no area with more than 4 peaks. So if I see an area with 3, that indicates 3 individuals.
So after you had done your initial analysis, I believe it was just before you were about to write your report, you then decided that you should go back and look at the mixture and assume that Ronny Walker was included in that mixture.
Yes, so when I went to write my report, I was reviewing the information that was given to me from the submitting agency, and I saw it was represented as being from Ronny Walker's vehicle. So since he it's supposed to be from his vehicle, I can use him as an expected donor. So when I compared his profile as an expected donor, it then showed it was a mixture of 3. And the way that can happen is if, for example, there's an area with 4 peaks. And so, like I said, that can indicate 2 individuals. But if someone is, so let's say I have 10, 11, and 12. But if, for example, the person is a 10-10, now I have 3 types left over. So the 3 types would mean it's 2 people in addition to the expected donor. So once I take the expected donor and use it for a mixture interpretation, it can change the number of contributors from my initial interpretation. And that's just the way mixture interpretation goes sometimes.
So after you decided to go back and assume Mr. Walker to be a contributor, that's when you then changed from 2 donors to 3 donors?
Yes.
Okay. This is one of those swabs I talked about earlier where you mentioned there was a positive presumptive test for blood.
Yes.
You have 3 contributors to this mixture. Can you tell whose potential blood that is?
No, I cannot say the source of any individual's DNA in a mixture or any source of DNA in a sample type.
So for example, in this mixture in FDLE item 11, that swab from the driver's side rear door, you included Nilexia Alexander as a potential contributor to that overall mixture.
I did.
But you cannot tell us that Ms. Alexander's blood is found on that mixture.
Correct, I cannot say that.
And that third individual that is included in the mixture, because we talked about Ms. Alexander, you then make the assumption of Mr. Walker. Did you have enough information to compare that third individual to the other known standard from Mr. Creed?
Yes, I did compare Robert Creed to the mixture.
Okay. And he was excluded?
I believe so, but I
Sure.
just want to double check.
Absolutely.
It was actually no determination for that item.
Okay, I'm sorry. So no determination. So does that mean you cannot include or exclude Mr. Creed?
Correct.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get that wrong on you. Let me turn now then to the black jacket. And I believe that was FDLE item number 10.
Correct.
Okay. And in this particular mixture, did you make any assumptions with regard to Mr. Walker?
I did not.
Okay. But he is included as a potential contributor to that mixture in item number 10, the black jacket.
Yes.
Along with that profile, you observed 2 other profiles.
Yes, 2 other individuals are present in that mixture.
And remind me again, did you compare that mixture to Robert Creed?
I did.
And what were your results with regard to Mr. Creed?
He is excluded as a contributor to the mixed DNA profile.
You also compared those other 2 DNA profiles to the known standard for Nilexia Alexander.
I did compare Nilexia Alexander to the mixed DNA profile.
And she also is excluded as a contributor to any of the DNA on that jacket.
Correct.
Okay. Can I have a moment, please, Ron?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you also indicate whether or not you did any presumptive blood testing on the jacket?
I did, and it was negative for the chemical indications of blood.
So no indication of potential blood on that jacket?
Correct.
Okay. Nothing further. Thank you, ma'am.
May we read?
Okay.
Will you please be excused?
From the defense?
Please.
Yes, Judge. She may be excused.
Thank you.
We thank you, sir.